I am thrilled to welcome you all to this latest installation of our webinar series. If you're interested in previous ones, they are featured and recorded, as this one will be, and posted on our YouTube channel and also via our LinkedIn. So I encourage you to please become a part of our social media universe to revisit this topic as well as to look at previous ones. I'm really excited today to invite our colleagues from NACUBO, or the National Association of College and University Business Officers. And I'm really pleased because our colleagues from NACUBO have led the charge of really unpacking and demystifying this idea that the business side of the university is just solely that, just the business side. And these two colleagues in particular have been wonderful at dismantling that myth and leading us to the idea that how we choose to manage the finances of a university also speak a lot to our values and our vehicles for student success, institutional improvement, and achieving our goals in education writ large. And that we have to really blend student success and our choices with respect to finance and data. And hence today's topic, student-centered transformation, aligning data, finance, and student success. And I'm especially pleased to have two colleagues from NACUBO who have also become professional friends over the years. We are joined by Lindsay Waite, the Senior Director of Business Intelligence at NACUBO, and Kelly Rainey, who is the Senior Director for Student Success Initiatives at NACUBO. And I believe that you're sharing with us information that started off as a grant initiative that has really been institutionalized and become and integrated into NACUBO's work writ large across all of this. So I'm really thrilled to have you share with what you have learned and what you are leading and doing with our USU community. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you both to share that information and to enlighten us with ways to blend data, student success, and finance in this world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a very kind introduction. While I am getting the screen share up, I will just add in, although there's not much to add in, but I will add in a little bit about what is the Senior Director of Business Intelligence, what do I do? So as our Senior Director of Business Intelligence, the parts of my portfolio of work at NACUBO are really anything related to data. So our research projects, so the studies like the endowment study, the tuition discounting study, some of the research we do around bursar functions at institutions. And then I also manage all of our analytics, data, and AI portfolio. So anything that is a resource NACUBO might be working on or professional development opportunities in that area. So that is the short bit about me. Kelly, did you want to add a little bit about your role at NACUBO as well?
Sure. Again, hello everyone. So I have the opportunity to really help to create and implement various different tools that have really helped with the intersection of strategic finance and student success. So if you've heard about the Student Success Hub through NACUBO, we worked on developing free resources to support our institutions, including our chief business officers, and how to help have those conversations, how to look at the integrating planning of this work, connecting it to data, and to ultimately help with looking at our budgeting practices, our processes, and of course, our resource allocations. And so what we do with institutions today is really help them not only in utilizing those toolkits, but how to have those conversations and to really transform the way that we operate, knowing that we do have to do a better job of connecting the dots around those types of conversations. So I'll also just back up a little bit too, Lindsay, if it's okay, just say a little bit more about NACUBO, because if you're not familiar with us, we have been around for some time now, 60 plus years, and we've been working with institutions, over 1,400 institutions, really helping with this, making sure that we manifest the conversation around business and finance and the work that we do. We support the entire institution and have been doing so in really helping not only looking at research and policy, which really falls under a lot of what Lindsay does in her practice, but also as we look at supporting institutions, not only in the student success space, but also what Lindsay and I get the opportunity to do more is really talking about that intersection of data to inform decisions and really building that knowledge management. And some of the work that Lindsay's even doing now with AI and helping to connect those dots as well. And so you can see too, just on the screen, that we not only are we talking about looking at the business and finance of our institutions, but overall just the overarching economic vitality, our practices, and just remembering that we're really helping to move the mission of our institutions forward. So there's a number of different ways that you can interact with NACUBO. This isn't the one opportunity, so feel free to check out our website at nacubo.org to learn more about the various different resources in which we can support you and the work that you do at your institution. And before I pass it back over to Lindsay, one thing that which is really important to all the work that we do is really thinking about this impact on students. What sometimes people assume is that NACUBO is just only the business side of the house and that we don't necessarily have those underpinning components to students and what work happens with students. But everything that we do and all the conversations that we have with our institutions really come back to how do we support our students. And you see that thread through the work that not only we produce in our research and our advocacy, the conversations that we have, not only at a federal level, but in concert with our regions that we work with. But holistically, and even the work that I directly do is how do we ensure that we connect the dots in these conversations that ultimately directly impact our students. So you'll hear a lot more about that in the examples that we'll share with you today. But just know that holistically, NACUBO is here to support in this conversation as you move forward in the work that you're doing, regardless if you work in the business side of the house or not. All of our resources are supporting the institution holistically.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And I just realized as I was transitioning slides, Kelly got all the happy slides about NACUBO and all of how our work relates to student success. And I just realized we assigned me the bummer slide. So this is the bummer slide, which is NACUBO's work around the top business issues in higher education. But I think it kind of ties everything that Kelly was saying together and kind of, gives an exclamation point to some of the things that Jennifer shared about us earlier. So this is NACUBO's top 5 business issues. The new list, I know it says of 2025, the new list for 2026 is going to be released September 21st. So if you're not on NACUBO's mailing list for Current, which is our weekly newsletter, try to sign up for that. Otherwise, check out our website on September 21st and you'll see the new list. But I do think, and I kind of know what the list is going to be for 2026, but even looking at this list, and there's definitely a lot of overlap, I think we see why this work that Kelly was talking about that is so important, which is tying together the business and finance folks and really the core mission of most institutions, which is student success. This slide to me shows why it's so challenging and why the resources that Kelly and I are about to share with you are so important and useful at your institutions. So the top 5 business issues of 2025 were number 1, managing unreliable funding sources. 2, communicating the value of higher ed. 3, policy and political disruptions that were going on last year. 4, supporting the workforce. And number 5, meeting rising operational costs. To me, this really paints the picture of there's a lot of external things going on in the world that make our work, not just business officer work, but the work of higher ed as a whole, a lot more challenging. And last year's number 1 business issue, managing unreliable funding sources, a lot of the ways that we talked about that issue and what was coming up from our members a year ago is there's a lot going on in the world and we need to use data to make decisions, but that in itself is a challenge, which is where the resources that Kelly and I are going to share with you come in. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I will talk about the first of the 2 free resources that Kelly and I would like to share with you today. And that's the Change with Analytics playbook. So this work really stems from a long-time partnership that NACUBO has had with some other organizations, AIR and EDUCAUSE, so our friends who work in IR and IE, as well as our friends who work in IT. So a lot of the operational folks in higher ed. This partnership has been going on for a long time, but one of the big thought pieces that our 3 organizations put out came out in 2019, and that was the joint statement on analytics saying, hey, everybody in higher ed, we need to be using data. And all of you came back to us and said, we already know that. There's lots of challenges. When are you going to help us? When are you going to develop some tools to help us do all of that work? And so we listened to our members. And so we're able to secure a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then a couple years later, we're able to produce the Change with Analytics playbook, which takes all of the ideas from the joint statement on analytics and puts them into plays, actionable plays that you can download and use at your institutions. So I'll go into this in a little bit more depth, but obviously I'm not going to be able to talk about everything, and you're not going to be able to hear everything in the toolkits that Kelly will talk about. But just to give you a flavor for what's in the playbook, they really are focused on action. So they're all about change. So change management. And when you think about change management, you need to think about, okay, well, before I can decide where I want to go, where am I? So we have a section of the playbook on assessing where you are. Then you have to develop a plan. So we have a series of plays to help you create a plan. And then when it comes to data, as you're executing your plan and you're moving forward and growing in your data and analytics maturity, you also need to think about security, privacy, ethics, data literacy. That's what comes up in the other two sections of the playbook. So data governance, and then also supporting a data literate community. What I think all of these things have in common is that they mean data isn't one person's job. Data really is everybody's role at your institution, and sometimes bringing the people together and really thinking about this change management process is more challenging than anything with a particular data tool or anything with analysis that we might need to do. So I am going to share a short institution example here in just a second. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea that everybody has a data role. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to be an analyst, although AI can definitely help in terms of spreading out some of those skills and abilities. It does mean we all have to know what our role with data is. And so in the Change with Analytics playbook, we know that every campus is unique. Not every campus has the same titles or roles or exact job descriptions, but you probably all have 5 basic roles when it comes to data and analytics use at your institutions. And so those are outlined here. Some of you on this webinar probably have more than one hat that you wear, so you might be a couple of these things that are on this screen. But we have our data champion, so those who are really directing and guiding and leading data analytics, and now in some cases data-related AI initiatives at their institutions. We also need the support of leadership. That doesn't mean your leadership has to become data analysts, but they do need to see the value of data, and they do play a role in terms of providing executive sponsorship or support on campus. Then, usually working very closely with your data champion are your data and analytics professionals. So people who are the business analysts, the IR professionals, the IT professionals who are doing the day-to-day data work. Then you have your data users, which hopefully is everybody at your institution using data to make decisions, whether it's related to strategic planning and some high-level decisions, or whether it's just using data as part of our day-to-day operations. And then I said earlier, ethics, data privacy, data security, all of that is important. I would say even more so in today's AI era than maybe it had been in the past. But our 5th group we have here are our data, the people who are behind the data. So the students, the faculty, the staff, those who are behind the numbers. And so a lot of our work also calls on institutions to remember that a lot of the data you're working with represent people. And so data privacy and security are important. All of this to say, teamwork is really important. And that is the one case study example that I have chosen to highlight in today's short webinar, but is on how does the playbook really bring people together at our institutions, and really how does that work? So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, and I'm going to hope that my audio share feature is working. And we're going to hear just a 2-minute clip. I haven't shared the whole podcast interview, but we're going to hear a 2-minute clip from a podcast interview with Dr. Latoya Hart at Jackson State University. So she leads their institutional research efforts, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience with the Change with Analytics Playbook grant project and what it really meant for her and her colleagues at Jackson State. So let's hope that my audio works. Have the link set in the right place. Oh, it was off a little bit.
When we first started this project, we had a president, a permanent president. So after the initial meeting with the entire teams and the other institutions, we were in the airport and we did find out that we would be transitioning to an interim acting president. That made this project even more real for us because it's a playbook that gives executive summary. Provides presidents with information. So therefore, we could provide this playbook to an incoming president to say, these are the things that we need to think about when it comes to data governance, data literacy. And it provides them with an executive summary of the work of how do we transition to this whole data atmosphere that we have. We started out with human resources. That is the department that we wanted to start with, looking at data governance, data stewards, data management. In the middle of our work, our human resources director transitioned out of the institution. So this is very real. It's very usable. It's friendly. So I encourage people to embrace it, to look at it, to share it with your presidents, your provosts, because change in higher education is real. And we experience that real time working on this project. We didn't know how we was going to finish the project because we were in this transition. So I think, as I stated before, two of my colleagues serve on the executive cabinet. So it was up to them to sell it to the interim acting president that this is important work and here is why.
All right. I know that was just a brief clip, but I hope that the part of the story that you heard and what you'll see when I switch slides here in just a second is that the playbook is not connected to particular individuals at your institution. It's work that can hopefully keep happening even as your campus navigates other challenges. And that, as Latoya said, it's all about collaboration. It's about teamwork. It's about making sure that you're making progress despite everything else that's going on. So despite whatever the new top 5 business issues might be, that we're moving forward and continuing to focus on change and change for the better at our campuses. And so on the next slide, I can highlight a little bit more about the story at Jackson State, as well as some of the other plays that were developed by the other 6 institutions that our team worked with as we developed the Change with Analytics playbook. So Latoya actually was talking about a couple different sections of the playbook itself. And so I'm going to start at the bottom of this list, and then I'm going to go back to the top and kind of walk through what you'll see on the website when you go and visit this, which I hope everyone does. So the team plays, the reason I have them listed on the bottom of the slide here is that they don't have their own special section in the playbook. We actually have them on every single section because people is often the hardest part of a lot of this data work. And so at the bottom, you see the list of the 3 team plays that are included in the playbook, and they are assemble and manage teams for analytics initiatives. A lot of that is questions and items designed to help you make sure what voices do we have included in this particular data initiative, who might be we missing that we really need to include. Also, as Latoya said, there's plays in here, the next one in particular that you can just give to your president or chancellor. So we have the executive sponsor checklist. What's their role? What do they need to be doing as an analytics initiative is just getting started? What about when we move on to the continuous improvement phase? What should your president be doing? What's their role with data? And then the last item that's listed there under team plays is exploring typical analytical job responsibilities. So what we did is we went through various job postings and basically tried to create a menu of items, tasks, and responsibilities that you might be able to use as you're either developing new data positions or as you think about professional development opportunities for folks on your staff, so people that you're working with to continue building up some of those data literacy skills. So those are the plays that are throughout the playbook. Now, I know, Kelly knows, everyone else on this webinar knows that institutions aren't all in the same place when it comes to using data and analytics, and also, frankly, AI as well. And many of these plays would help your institution as you think about those change management practices as well. So you might not necessarily go in order of the plays that we have listed here. Some of these plays might not be helpful for you for another 5 years at your institution, but I'm going to kind of walk through them in what would seem like a sequential order for how you might use them. I'm going to do this very quickly because in about 6 minutes, I'm going to pass the microphone back to Kelly to show you some other tools as well. But I'll go ahead and just give the highlights. So the first group of plays is assess the current state of analytics. Again, we know institutions are going to have different capabilities, different capacity for their staffs in terms of how much time and effort can we take to do a dive into our current data and analytics capabilities. So this is an area where I wouldn't do all 3 plays. I would probably pick one of the 3, maybe 2, depending on how much time and capacity my staff had to help me determine where are we currently with our abilities. So the first one is probably the shortest in terms of assessment pieces, and that's conducting an analytic self-assessment, so a multiple choice item that you can deploy to multiple staff at your institution with some suggestions for how you might modify it and how you would talk about those things with your leaders at your campus. Then we have a deeper dive, conducting a needs assessment focus group. This is a lot of qualitative work in terms of the assessment, but you definitely get a lot more detailed information about data and analytics use at your institution. And then we've modified directions for a traditional SWOT analysis, strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats, but to be specifically about data and analytics capabilities. So that's another more qualitative version. Once you know where you are, the second group of plays, which is create and manage a data strategy plan, has plays to help you, one, set a vision for where you want to go. So you can't do everything and be everything to everyone. So what's going to be your most strategic focus when it comes to building your data and analytics capabilities? Then how do you develop a roadmap for getting there and making sure you're holding yourselves accountable? And along the way, how are you getting buy-in from folks in other areas of your institution as you're releasing various data products or deliverables or expectations? So that's what those 3 plays do. The next section focuses on data governance. I do think some of these things can be modified, probably, you want to modify a little bit in terms of thinking about the impact that AI has had on data governance and data governance rules. But still, the gist of the plays are still very usable and I think very practical for a campus to use. So the first play listed there is defining data governance roles. That's actually the play that Latoya Hart from Jackson State University and her collaborators at Jackson State worked on. And so it really is just assigning who's going to be held accountable for what, who needs to know what about various data elements at our institution, but really a piece to get folks started around collaborating around data. Then we have a play on writing a data governance charter. And then for institutions who are maybe a little further along in this space, we also have a play on, okay, how do you assess where you are? How are things going with data governance? And so we have a play on facilitating a data steward self-assessment. The last section of the playbook is all about data literacy. So I hear this a lot. Institutions have a lot of data. They just don't always use it. Sometimes folks still want to rely on their gut or what they thought was right all along, and they're looking for data to just prove them right and use that to make a decision. For institutions who might be struggling with that, or units who might be struggling with that, we have a play on making data-informed decisions. So it walks you and hopefully a group of your colleagues through the process of going from having the data to making a decision, and it helps you think through other considerations. Another challenge that campuses have is we might have folks who are really data experts, but they struggle with telling the story of the data so that folks can even make appropriate decisions or appropriate actions with the data. So there's a play on how do you communicate with data, or how do you tell a story? And as I said, privacy, bias, ethics, all of those things are also important when it comes to working, especially with people data. And so the last two plays in the Build a Data Literate community are really focused on exactly that. So we have a play on helping data consumers understanding the ethical use of data with some scenarios built in. That play is done like a workshop. And then a little more technical focus on those issues is the other play, which is working with data stewards to reduce bias. So again, that play is set up as a series of scenarios that you would walk through with folks who are doing the day-to-day work with the data and seeing just how important some of that work is, whether it's data entry, data analysis, data management. There's examples of all of those in that particular play. So that's what's in the playbook. When you get there, this is the last slide that I have. I just wanted to highlight just how quick and easy it is to use. So those topics that I said, whichever ones you were jotting down as, I must go back and look at this. When you get to the website, each of the plays is presented as a PowerPoint slide deck. On the first page is the title and then a one-sentence review of what that play is going to do. If that play is not for you, close it and move to the next one. I don't want to waste your time. The second slide of every single play has a little bit longer summary just to make sure you really are in the right place and you have the capacity to do this work at your institution. So it gives the what, who, how, and when of the play. Again, if it doesn't fit your context, move on and pick a more appropriate play for where your campus is at in terms of its data and analytics journey. The middle part of all the plays is different. It's gonna do exactly what the play summary has said. Then depending on how the play ends, we might give suggestions for next steps. Usually it's looping you into the next appropriate play. And then where we could, we also have some examples from the institutions themselves. So telling their stories, you can kind of see how to apply a lot of the work or how you might need to do this play multiple times to have an impact at your campus. So that, in a nutshell, is the Change with Analytics playbook. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to email me after this webinar. But I don't want to take any time away from Kelly talking about the Student Success Hub. So I think we're switching who's screen sharing, right, Kelly? All right, so I will stop sharing so you can start.
Appreciate it. And Lindsay, are you able to see that yet? Great. Thank you. So definitely part of what Lindsay and I do when we kind of team up and do presentations together, we want to make sure that people understand that even though we're talking about kind of two resources that are available to you, you really can use them in a connected fashion. And so as Lindsay talked about with the plays, that's really thinking about your change management and even in some layers to it, project management strategies that you can do at your institution and really think about institutionalizing and operationalizing much efforts around being more not only data informed, but really thinking about how to build that knowledge management within your institution. The Student Success Hub are resources that you can utilize to help you with those plays. And so we usually, as we talk to campuses, show you various different ways in which you can think about those elements together. And knowing the amount of time we have together, we're going to give you a little highlight of the Student Success Hub to give you some idea of what particular type of resources and tools you can leverage to help you with some of the plays that you might have thought were significant as Lindsay went through that list with you. So again, if you haven't heard about the Student Success Hub, the Student Success Hub actually was stood up a little over 2 years ago and made available to all institutions, regardless if you are a part of NACUBO or not, to be able to really look at that intersection between strategic finance and student success. And they are various different tools that are available to institutions to meet you where you are currently in addressing that type of intersection. And one of the things that we really spend time on is making sure that we unpack with institutions and understanding the fact that really when we're thinking about student success, we do have to really branch out and stop thinking as an institution that student success belongs to a certain area, whether it's on the academic side of the house or even the student affairs side of the house, though it is a part of their priorities and the efforts in which they support students. really think about the impact that it has holistically for the institution, and that there is an underpinning of strategic finance imperative related to this. And so we really want to start to unpack this conversation holistically with institutions to think about how do we reduce the barriers around student success when we're aiming to improve the sustainability of initiatives, when we're looking to increase institutional effectiveness, when we're just understanding truly how to ensure that we are student-centered in our planning and budgeting and our resource allocation pieces. And so that really does move us into this greater conversation that we should be having holistically at our institutions around thinking about student success as a strategic financial imperative. And what does that mean for your institution? How do you shift those types of conversations? And in many ways, we think about not only efforts that we do at our institutions, that sometimes they may be very centered in on just a segment or population, subpopulations of students. But how do we think about scaling and sustaining those efforts so we reach a greater number of students and supporting them? How do we start thinking about our processes around our budgeting to ensure that we can accelerate and really help to look at implementation practices that are going to help ramp up our efforts on related to retention and persistence, completion, and even helping our students from a workforce standpoint? How do we really think about the ways that we look at our investments to ensure that they directly relate to student outcomes and that we're just not looking at line items in our budgeting practices? And then also recognizing the fact that the goal isn't about just spending or even looking at more spending. Many of us are having to cut, having to reallocate dollars that we already have, looking at even our state allocations and knowing that there's some restrictions related to that. Our goal is really to ensure that we are doing a better job of aligning our expenditures to address our student needs. And so we do have to start thinking about what does that mean when we're bringing various different people to the conversation now that normally are not involved in those types of detailed analysis, and really starting to pivot even how do we ask the key question around what can we afford to do, to really thinking about how do we look at our investments so that it better improves our student success. If we lead with that question in our conversations, we realize that that pivots the way that we think, the way that we operate, and even what types of plays we should be implementing in order to really have a better handle on what's driving student success and how do we scale and sustain that work. And so part of the Student Success Hub really has centered in on recognizing the fact that not only are there some tools that we can support our institutions with, but that also is a mindset shift for those that are in our business and finance spaces. And how do we support those individuals in thinking differently about these types of conversations? How do we arm them with types of ways and to engage in those types of conversations? And how do we ensure that they become champions of student success? But they need that knowledge. So part of our effort has been over the last couple of years is to really not only help support that, but learn from institutions that are doing that work to be able to share those types of insights as well. And so that enters in the Student Success Hub. And so prior to our actual launch, we spent several years working with institutions to unpack what does this conversation look like? What do resources look like to be able to support institutions in this work? How do individuals need to enter into utilizing toolkits so they actually see the fruit of their labor within, as we often say, within a short run of time? That could be 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 months. So that way they can actually see how they can move the needle on these types of conversations. And how do we talk about capacity building in this work? That it's not just implementing a tool just to have another tool to implement. How does it align to the work that you're currently doing at your institution to help you be better aligned with strategic finance practices that are going to help you to sustain student success initiatives at your institution? So our effort has really been to not only learn from our institutions to be able to do this work, but to really push out that type of information so that you can actually connect with sister institutions around this type of conversation that's going to help you move the needle on this particular effort. So that interests the Student Success Hub. And again, if you haven't had the opportunity to check out this free resource, please do so. The QR code is listed on the screen along with the URL. And again, it's a free resource that's available to all institutions, and it was designed to support all types of institutions that really are seeking to build sustainable capacity to improve not only student outcomes, but to do it through a student-centered or centric financial analysis, looking at our planning efforts, looking at our budget development processes, and again, aligning that to be data informed and looking at how that helps to support our decision making at our institution. So you'll find within the Student Success Hub various different toolkits, and I'll talk about why they're called toolkits, but they are all customizable to be able to help support institutions and meet you where you are. And so that's looking at where your institutional goals currently stand and how you want to center student success within these various different comprehensive toolkits and what supporting resources will help you with that. You'll also find that there are some institutional use cases, those institutions that worked alongside us to help develop these different resources. In those use cases, you can hear directly from the institutions themselves as to what they learned, what they gained from this particular experience, what they actually tested and utilized at their own campus, and how they really were able to be successful in developing these various different tools to help support other institutions. You also have the opportunity to speak with experts on how you could stand these particular resources up at your institution, what questions that you may have, where do you feel like it would be best to support you in aligning the various different resources that are available, and then being able to actually kind of work alongside various different practitioners to help you with that process as well. And you'll see that the toolkits are really aligned within these three focus areas. And that again came from the work with the institutions to better understand where do our institutions need the most support in identifying key components around supporting not only barriers and challenges that they're currently undertaking, but also where there's some opportunities for continued development. So it wasn't just about addressing pain points. It was addressing where we see our needs to be able to understand current initiatives and how do you move those initiatives forward. And to be able to see impact within, again, that short run of time. We heard directly from institutions, and one president in particular told me, Kelly, I don't have time to see the fruit of my labor 18 months from now. How are we going to be able to address the needs that we have right now to help us continue moving that ball down the field? And so we learned a lot from institutions to be able to undertake that. And a part of that was to really identify where are those focus areas that we should really lean into. And you see there are three focus areas that are on the screen in which the toolkits are categorized. That first one, and as you heard from Lindsay, really focusing on that data and analysis component, that is one of the first things that we heard from all of the institutions that we worked with, is that we really do need to unpack more around data to inform decisions, but also realizing there's other layers to the data component, and much of which, as Lindsay and I worked on these initiatives together, we heard synergy around the fact of not only looking at infrastructure, thinking about not only the data governance component, looking at how your systems connect to one another, but also how to analyze this information. We often say when we're talking to campuses that people have data. Data isn't our issue. Our issue is really how do we unpack that information to be able to really use it and leverage it, and recognizing that various different levels of interaction across our institution, people absorb data, utilize data, and even enter into the space of just starting to figure out how to work with data at all different levels. So how do we help with that analysis to be able to meet people where they are, that they can use this information to be able to inform decisions? And then definitely from a usage standpoint, that goes hand in hand with thinking about analysis, is that not only is it to understand the information, but how do we manage and work with it? How do we know where to plug it in? And then also thinking about the synergy of the work holistically that we do, not just thinking about our own lane, but the connectivity that it has with various different components across the institution. And so that kind of leads us into that second focus area. And we heard a lot from institutions about return on investment, ROI. And as we started to unpack that conversation a little bit more with institutions, it really got to, we really need to know how do we then optimize what we learn from that return on investment? And how does that ultimately support our students? And so this really got us into a conversation around really resource optimization. It isn't so much just to be able to have that calculator, that ROI calculator, but the so what around it. How do we optimize that information? And so we heard from institutions that we worked with really thinking about the connectivity of information from enrollment to what happens in our student engagement areas and connecting that with the financials. And one of the things that came up quite a bit from the institutions was, well, connecting the financials to that is really challenging. But doesn't that give you the whole picture? Doesn't that help you get a better understanding of the total student experience and able to inform how do you scale and sustain this work? And how do we help people really think about what it takes to build better budgets? And have those types of conversations on campus. And as of late, even thinking about academic prioritization and looking at program health, how do we start connecting dots and giving you starter kits to all of that to help you enter into those conversations? And then the last piece there around student-centered planning processes and budgeting, well, we heard a lot from institutions that we have processes in place. Many of us, we have processes in place for years and even decades that we know are broken, that we know have challenges, and that in many cases, they actually hinder students from moving forward at the institution. How do we start examining those particular efforts so that way we can come together and have a detailed conversation as to, do we need to modify? Do we need to enhance? Do we need to just examine ways in which to understand are our processes really student-centered? And if they're not, how do we make those efforts a little bit more student-friendly to be able to support them in their persistence and their completion? And definitely as we start having those detailed conversations about workforce and economic mobility. So with those three focus areas, that moves us into 11 toolkits that currently live within the Student Success Hub. I do say currently because we're always working on toolkits and we're always about to drop another toolkit based on different conversations that we're not only having with institutions, but also some of the work that we're seeing in the field and being able to continue to make sure that these resources are dynamic and that they support institutions where they are. So within those three focus areas that we just went through, you will see that there are toolkits that are listed under each one of those. We have three that sit within the space of data to inform decisions, again, within the scope of thinking about infrastructure. And so you heard from Lindsay just a moment ago of thinking about the plays around data governance. We have tools that complement those plays to help you with that work. You heard from Lindsay too, talking about plays of thinking about where you stand when it comes to data and analytics on campus. We have a toolkit around data ecosystem assessment and giving you the opportunity to unpack where do I currently stand when it comes to looking at our data and our analytics on campus and where there's opportunities for us to kind of strengthen those key components. And even just starting to analyze and understand how to look at your data, enter into conversations around it, bringing in that financial component is the iPad's peer benchmarking dashboard. And that gives you another lens into thinking about how do I work with data, utilize it, and have those conversations. I'll talk a little bit more about that one in just a moment. You get into, again, that second area about the financial resource optimization. And again, you'll see toolkits here that talk about how to build better budgets. You'll see also not only the academic prioritization piece, looking at the program scanner and being able to talk about program health, that's listed here. And then even as you're talking about grants, in many cases, we are really having to talk about sustainability as we think about grants that are starting to be lowered in the amounts that are being offered. There's more scrutiny as to what grants are available to our institutions. How do we start really thinking about the management of current grants that we have on campus? How do we sustain those grants once those grants sunset? And then being able to have some conversations about other opportunities of looking at grant work at our institutions. And then you get into that last focus area. And again, that student-centeredness of the work that we're doing. So thinking about how do we analyze our current budget processes? How do we even start to thinking about the equity of the work that we do around our budgeting? How do we think about resource allocation, where in many cases our budgets are not getting any bigger? How do we prioritize resource allocation to ensure that it's supporting our students? And one of the big ones that actually has a nice thread through all of the various different toolkits, how can we be better collaborators in this work? How do we ensure that our business and finance can have those conversations with the academic side of the house, the student affairs side of the house, and all other different components, and accelerate this work, knowing that we all have very tight timelines to be able to address some of these things? How can we come together and support you in these types of conversations? And so again, there are 11 toolkits that exist, and many of them definitely have elements that you can pull. You don't have to use everything that's in the toolkit, but there's elements in which those various different toolkits can be helpful to you. Just like Lindsay provided you with an institutional example here, wanted to share one of our institutions that's been alongside of us since day one, helping us to create the toolkits, to be able to test the toolkits, and even used many of them since we've launched, is Rutgers University Newark. And if you're familiar with Rutgers, very diverse campus, doing a lot of work and thinking about supporting not only transfer students, but the many first generation as well. And when we speak with Rutgers, initially, they walked in conversation thinking about how they were going to better partner with their enrollment side of the house. And as they entered into these types of conversations, they realized there were several different layers to the Student Success Hub that can help them with interacting across the entire campus. And so they actually have worked on several of the toolkits. They started off with looking at and examining their budgeting practices, and their budgeting and finance office realized that they were pushing things out to the campus community that were just overwhelming. That in many cases, they were giving them documents that were 45 pages long, and many of their colleagues in the other areas really weren't understanding how to best contribute to the budgeting process. And so they took the time to really unpack what they could do differently. And that led them to actually using another toolkit on how to build a data dictionary, because they then realized that they weren't speaking the same language. And so they utilized one of the toolkits on the data to inform side of the house, to really start to better align the conversation and creating language to help with the budgeting practices. Since that time, they have also leveraged the funding allocation matrix to be able to really examine how to take budget requests that were over $25 million and really narrow that down to what they actually had within their budget to be able to ensure that they were able to meet students' needs, and they were able to utilize that in concert with the other entities. And just recently, and when you check out the Student Success Hub, you'll also see just recently they just launched and utilized the program scanner to be able to examine how to really look at their programs within a certain sector of the institution to see where those dollars are really going and where they can not only scale some efforts, but also sustain and figure out where there may be some opportunities to actually leverage to better enhance those particular programs that need support. So a great use case. And if you have any colleagues at Rutgers University Newark, reach out to them. They are definitely able to share more and more of what they've been doing with the Student Success Hub. But we do have a webinar recording that will be posted to the website soon, where you can actually hear directly from them on their latest use of the toolkit, the program scanner. So one last thing that just to kind of give you an idea of a toolkit, and because we do stand by our little motto of 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 months, how you can use a toolkit within the course of a semester, within the course of a term. The iPad's peer benchmarking dashboard is one example of those toolkits. And you can simply just scan the QR code that's used on the screen if you want to navigate alongside me for a moment, or use that URL that's listed on the screen. And this will take you directly into the tool itself. And we often joke and say that the iPad's peer benchmarking dashboard wasn't meant to be actually the most popular toolkit, but it has remained the most popular toolkit. within the Student Success Hub itself. And one, because of the ease of it, but then two, it also gets you to immediate information in a very quick period of time. This is our 2-hour toolkit. And as you see on the screen, just a quick highlight about it, it's really to help you to start entering into how to have those conversations across the various different roles at our institutions. When we start layering in and looking at our data, how do we start to have ask good questions and have good dialogue about what we're seeing and where that takes us next. And in addition, if we layer in what we often have heard, oh, it's hard to bring the financial information into that conversation. Where we do what we do with the IPEDS peer benchmarking dashboards is to start you to see how you can do that. How can you start asking some of those questions, layering in the financial considerations? And when we're holistically looking at a picture together, what does that mean for the institution? So I'm going to show you really quickly just a couple of views in regards to that. And let me know if you can still see my screen. Good. So definitely what you see now is actually a quick view of just the toolkit of the IPEDS peer benchmarking dashboard. This is the browser view of this particular tool. When you go into the toolkit itself, you will see much more supporting information. And why we call it a toolkit is that it gives you a nice surrounding of supporting resources to be able to help you figure out how to leverage the tool, how to use the tool, how to complement it with the plays that you just heard a moment ago, and then also give you some idea of which institutions have used it and what ways they've done it before. But this is the browser view of the IPEDS peer benchmarking dashboards. You'll see from this screen, you're able to select your institution and then some peers that you can compare against as a part of the views here. And this gives you an idea of which particular information you have selected. So already pre-selected Florida State, you will see here just their Carnegie classification, their size, and the institutions that are being compared against them just for this view. As you fast forward through this, is what we call our information of our scorecard information, some highlights to help you to start thinking about what are some critical data that can be fruitful to engage in conversations. And regardless how you feel about IPEDS or not, the purpose of this dashboard is how do we enter into conversations utilizing data that exists already at the institution. So you do not have to create the dashboard. It is already given to you. You can use this browser view just to go ahead and have this conversation today. And so you will see here just general information about Florida State and what we call from our scorecard view, some of those key highlights based on the information that they have submitted to IPEDS in the given snapshot year. As you fast forward to some additional views, what we call kind of these high level cards, give you that 10-year factor as to what are some of the key information that relates to my institution across a 10-year period to better understand what have been some trends over time, where there's some opportunity for us to see how this aligns to our strategic priorities at an institution, and also what conversations are happening right now as it relates to these high-level key components that are noted on these cards. As you move forward, you will then also see some additional demographic information as we look at our faculty and compare that to our enrollment information, just understanding the dynamics of what we're seeing here, also by gender, just for additional context as it relates to some of the work that you may be doing at your institution. And one of the comparison pieces that first comes is just looking at that same view that you just saw a moment ago, but now with that peer group that you selected. And understanding is, as I often say with institutions, sometimes who you say are your peers may not actually be your peers. And so this is where you take the time to unpack that a little bit more to understand, how who we think are our peers right now, how has that trended over time? There's opportunity for us to look at multiple peer groups to get a better understanding of that comparison. And maybe this also gives you a better sense of who you need to identify as an additional peer group. And there's a couple other views. Here's where we start bringing in light touch of starting to unpack information around how do I look at the financials related to some of those indicators that were on the previous screen. So from a enrollment standpoint, we can start to look at not only those peers, our additional information over time, but now we can start to bring in just two key components that get into some really healthy information about looking at net revenue per FTE and even being able to start looking at what happens from a potential gain and loss in comparison to the same peer group. I'll go to retention because retention is one that I often say is a great conversation to unpack with various different individuals in the room. And you can see here, just from this quick view here, that if we start to just unpack, and oftentimes even on our campuses, how much it costs to retain versus to recruit. When we start to look at how much we are retaining just at this particular institution, just to estimate revenue from retained students, that's a nice healthy number. But what if we did start looking at just the loss of retention based on just our trend information? If we're saying we're losing 1.6, 1.7 almost from not retaining a certain group of students, and we're putting a lot of effort, a lot of revenue and recruitment, this now leads you into a healthy discussion on campus as to let's look at this a little bit more. And part of the hub, what we do is we give you context around each one of these components and what type of guiding questions can help you have those discussions on campus. So taking it a step further than just looking at a dashboard and people just talking about what they're seeing in their own little space, but when you bring that community together, how do we unpack a conversation just on this view here? And with some guidance that we give you as a part of the hub, what does this do to help you better align to what you should be doing at a campus? On campus, how does this connect back to your priorities? And where there may be some immediate shifts and opportunities for you to do some impact within a certain period of time to be able to help you move the needle on the work that you're doing on campus. So this gives you just a quick highlight as to what you can do with a toolkit. Definitely, again, spend some time with us to be able to unpack this a little bit more. Both myself and Lindsay are able to share more with you later on in regards to what toolkits can do for you along the side of the plays that exist.
I know we only have a couple minutes, and Jennifer, you may have questions from the audience for us or questions otherwise, but can I ask Kelly a question really quick myself? Kelly, how much does it cost folks to use either the Student Success Hub or the Change with Analytics playbook?
Yeah, it's a free $99.
Just
And the
making
only
sure.
right, and the other reason that we say that too is that we often have a funny saying. Lindsay's heard this numerous times: "Free like a puppy." Because definitely both of our resources are free to the any community that would like to use them. However, it takes lift. It does take time. It takes effort. And so making sure that we are knowledgeable of the fact that you do have to put some dedicated time into taking the time to unpack these resources, that requires some time and effort. And we don't want to underestimate that in this work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Kelly, for this work, for this presentation, and for being champions of how to use data and finance and student success resources effectively together. I think that's so critical. And I've been in my head thinking of all the ways that this really touches USU specifically and uniquely. I appreciated that Rutgers Newark, one of our members, was one of the examples. You mentioned other campuses that use this that are also USU members. And I even sort of did a little sidebar with you both about when you were talking about peer groups, Kelly, like USU members, that is a unique peer group in and of itself that is often really valuable to share data across. So I want to thank you all so much for your time today, for your work, and for making these resources available to all of us. And to everybody who is on this, participating in this webinar or looks at this recording, I encourage you to look at these resources, reach out to Lindsay and Kelly if you have questions or need more information. They're wonderful partners. And we will be posting this to our social media outlets for use in the future, and encourage you to forward to friends and talk to other folks about these incredible resources and how they can help urban serving universities. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and good luck to everyone in your back to school ventures, whether personally on your campuses or at your family or in your networks. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Appreciate it.